We're in the middle of a description of what could be called the sea of sorrow. It represents the ignorance and pain which are at the heart of our psyches. Whereas the immobile creatures stand contemplating the mystery of time, as it were, the mobile creatures, swayed by the twin forces of attraction and repulsion, love and hate, and afflicted by the terrible illness known as pleasure and pain, old age and death, become debilitated and decadent. Among the latter, the worms and vermin silently and patiently endure the fruits of their own past evil actions, contemplating them, as it were, all the time. So it's saying here that worms and vermin arise because of past evil actions. I've spoken before about this notion that our life circumstances are determined by actions in a previous birth, and that there's actually no virtue in this notion. It seems to be an expression of a tendency that we've all got, which is to judge somebody or something by their appearances or by their cultural background. Racism is a clear one. If somebody's black, we make definite assumptions about them depending on our culture. And similarly, if they're white, we all make assumptions. Some of these assumptions are positive, very often they're negative. And even within your own culture, the way a person speaks, the way they look. It was very common in Britain, in the West, this kind of assumption. You could tell from somebody's face, from the size of their earlobes, for example, whether they had criminal tendencies or not. So there's this idea that just by looking at somebody, we can determine their nature. And not only that, but in effect make a moral judgment on them. So this tendency to judge another being simply on how they appear, on how we classify them, is part of that tendency which wants to be morally superior, which wants to be right, which wants to believe things in order to have that sense of righteousness. So it's something which has to be looked at very, very carefully within our being. So as I said, this isn't a description of how things are. It's how a bleak assessment of things arises as a result of our own inner suffering, our own deep suffering. Because ultimately it's all consciousness, and therefore it can be rejoiced in as such. Vasishta continued, the trees stand, the very picture of misery, having to endure cold, wind and heat, yet laden with flowers and yielding fruits. Caught in the lotus known as this world, beings like bees hum restlessly all the time. The whole universe is, as it were, the begging bowl of Kali. And the translators put a note here which is suggestive of the feminine of Kala, which means time and death. But Kali is the famous black goddess, the goddess whose nature is action, motion. This Kali constantly seeks to fill the bowl with all the creatures of this world and to offer them again and again to her Lord. And I think her Lord is death. This universe can be compared to an aged woman. The darkness of self-ignorance is her hair. The sun and the moon are her restless eyes. Her internal and external nature include the gods Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, the earth, the mountains, etc. The truth concerning Brahman, the Absolute, is the treasure chest hidden in her chest. Her mother is the consciousness energy, or she is the mother known as consciousness energy. She is extremely agitated and inconstant like a cloud. The stars are her teeth. Dawn and dusk are her lips. The lotus is her palm. The sky is her mouth. The 7 oceans are her pearl necklace. She is clad in the garment of the blue firmament. The pole is her navel. The forests are the hair on her body. This aged woman is born again and again. She dies again and again. So I suppose the universe is also like goddess Kali, the divine mother who devours us. All this takes place in the light of consciousness. In this there are gods who are created within the twinkling of an eye by the creator Brahma, and there are beings who are destroyed by the very act of Brahma closing his eyes. In that supreme consciousness there are Rudras, who commence and conclude thousands of time cycles within the twinkling of an eye, and there are other deities who, within the twinkling of an eye, create and destroy deities like Rudra. Surely such manifestation is infinite. What is impossible for the infinite consciousness to bring about in infinite space? However, all these are but imagination, which is a manifestation of ignorance. All prosperity and all adversity, childhood, youth, old age and death, as also suffering, what is known as being immersed in happiness and unhappiness and all the rest of it, all these are the extensions of the dense darkness of ignorance. This ignorance is about believing the truth and validity of our own notions, the essential truth and validity of our own notions, not realizing that they're all stories, and that they should only be taken on board provisionally. This is what ignorance is. It's the darkness which fuels the deep sorrow in our own psyches.